Thank you for joining us on part 3 of our webinar learning series. This is taking the project from start to end. Today we're going to be reviewing some mapping, some specific mapping options and also engines. And we're going to be talking about those. On the mapping side, we're going to be talking about bursting pages, setting up some conditionals, macros and text options, and how to do those. We're also going to be talking about setting up, we're going to actually set up an iDocs engine, and also we're going to set up the IPDF monitor, which really is an engine that will monitor for output that will convert in a PDF, that output into a PDF and put it in a directory. So we'll be doing that as well today live. So as a recap, we're just going to jump into it, and a little recap is that from last time, we're going to hit on this because the engine and the mapping do work hand in hand, and sometimes. In this case, we're going to be monitoring an outqueue for a spool file. We're going to test on the spool file for an actual spool file attribute value, and when we identify that spool file to be the spool file we want to work with, we're going to take action and actually invoke the merge process with that application, and we're going to send out the results with the spool file being handed off to an outqueue for future use. And as you remember from last time, we can daisy chain those process along the way. So just a little recap on this, not too much on it. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually talk about a condition and how we're going to set this up. This is what, based on this, on the condition that we're doing, this is to actually, if you recall on our form, and let me just bring that over. On our form, this middle section right here where we added the next month special, this is actually based on a condition on the month of, on the date here. So we actually set this up, and this always conditionally inputs into this form, and that's what we're talking about, conditionally adding a image in this case to pop up when we want that to happen. And for that to actually happen is we're going to actually do 2 steps in that process, and we're going to actually create the graphics and upload the graphics into iDocs. We're going to set up the condition to trigger that action. And to do that, let me just bring this up here, our design, our original design. We have our original design with no graphics in the middle. In this case, we're going to open up the graphics. I actually had this already selected a little earlier. You can design this however you want in whatever, Word, GIMP, Photoshop, whatever you want. It doesn't really matter too much, even Paint, which keeps it real simple. And then bring it in. So I'm going to actually open up our original design. I'm just going to copy this in there, and I'm actually going to move this into position where I want this to appear. And the next step to this is actually we're going to select everything by hitting the Control-Alt key. While holding the Control key, we're actually going to deselect or unselect the image itself, or the Shift key there, and then we're going to delete everything else. Now we know that this image is exactly in the position we want it to show up in our document that comes out. So the next step towards this is actually uploading this into the IBMI. We're simply just going to select our printer, our iDocs option here. I'm going to do this in color because I want color output, and I'm going to send this up to our iDocs driver, which is going to bring into IMAP. IMAP will appear here, and this is actually where it's going to be. And this time I don't have to actually create a form application or anything like this. I just know that I want this up as a macro, which is a compile version of that design. I'm going to connect to our IBMI, and I'm going to give it a name. In this case, I'm just going to give it a name of just something I know that I'm going to get to later. In this case, I don't want to interfere with anything else I have in there, so I'm just going to give it a name. Hit the Tab key. You notice it gives it the name plus the extension of .mac for macro. And this is actually going to go and get installed in the Form FMG folder under QDLS, in which is where iDocs will actually retrieve it from. And we'll see that action here when we go into the green screen. So we just sent that up, process that through, and hit OK. At this point, we're done with IMAP and uploading the design. And we're done with the designer as well. And we'll go into the green screen to actually set up that condition. So from earlier conversations, I'm actually just going to go into our iDocs main menu. I'm going to work with our applications, and I'm going to select the R4 map. In this case, we've already done this ahead of time, but we're just going to go through it as so we need to enter the text. Don't necessarily spend time typing, but I want to show you how this works. So in this case, when I create it, I would hit F6, and I would actually have this window come in. I would populate it with an actual name of the condition I want this to be named, give it a little description, and then I want to tell it where I'm going to get the trigger. In this case, I want the trigger to be based on the month on the date field. So I found out what row that was in and what columns that was in. So between column 40 and 41 on row 10, if it equals 02, which is for February, then what I want is that macro that I uploaded to populate. And I want that to start on the upper left-hand corner. I just put in 10 pixels just because you could put 1, 10, doesn't really matter, just as long as you start on the upper left-hand corner because we're doing a whole macro page. If you do duplexing, you have that option to put that on the back side as well. In this case, we don't. We're not doing it. We're just doing the front side, so we just leave it as is. So what's going to happen is when this form application process, it will pick up this trigger as being a true value and will insert this macro along with our main document, thus populating the image into our finished product the way we want it and expect that to be, and that's going to be to populate it in this field. That's setting up a condition on a form application. You could also do it with text as well. You could do one or the other. If you left this blank and populated these fields here, then you can actually put a text, and you can actually put your text in this area here, and also the trigger will be the same. So we can actually do a trigger, populate it with text, and you would actually have that text appear. In this case scenario is you can actually have multiple of these. So you can actually, if you wanted to create in our invoice special, you could have for every month of the year, you can have different specials that would just trigger automatically. So if you pre-planned, you can have different things happening automatically. Okay, that's setting up a condition. Again, if you want more information, detail, if you have specific information that you want to go over in your case scenario, just send me an email and we can go over those specifically. Okay. The next thing we want to do is actually set up bursting. In this case scenario that we have, we're using a 2-page spoof file. And this 2-page spoof file, if we email this out, it would go out as one PDF with 2 pages. And since these are for 2 different companies, we don't want that necessarily to happen. So in our case, we're going to go into the mapping of our application, and I want this to burst on the actual customer number. And bursting essentially is just going to break up the form. It's going to group them by the definition. And when I find the customer number, in this case scenario, it's number block 11, I'm going to take a 1. And all I'm going to do is just change the bursting field to Y to burst. And I just do that, update it, and I'm done. So what's going to happen is here, as this spoof file processes through, this option is going to separate the bursting option is going to separate each spoof file page. If there were two invoices with the same customer number, it would group them together. So that way you can actually separate and group the invoices being outputted by the customer number. And we're just doing that simply. All you have to do is select the map field, select Y for bursting, and that takes care of that. A very simple step that's very useful to do. The next step on this, what we want to do is actually we're going to start setting up the engine for the iDocs engine and also set this up to email out. Now to do that, we're going to select a form application because we're going to take a little pre-step, and that's setting up smart routing. And smart routing is a way to conditionally set up the form application to, based on triggers, to say I'm going to email out or I'm going to fax or I'm going to print based on those triggers. We can do that using a database file. So we can say, based on a key, let's say we could say, look, if you find customer number 1234 and you see an email, then email it out to that email. that could be using a file, and that's usually option 14. In our case, we're actually going to use option 18 because we actually have our email address in the spool file itself. So if I actually look at the spool file and bring that in here, you'll see that we actually inserted my email address in the spool files. So we're just going to map out for that part of it. In our case here, I'm just going to select our form application with A to work with map fields, and I'm actually going to set up what that is. In this case, I'm going to do an F6. On field name, I'm going to hit F4. These are reserved map fields, and they all have specific actions that the software knows what to do. We have an OutQ one that's real popular. In this case, we're going to do the to address for email. So it knows when it finds this information on the specific row that I know my email address is on, which is row 7 between 9 and 35, it will know that if it sees information in there, that it will use that email address to send out the output to that customer. And I'm just going to do an F10 to update. That's how simple it is to do this. The next one I want to do in this form application is actually also be able to say, I'm going to trigger the actual smart writing process to happen. And we're going to actually send this out to two different scenarios, two different places. One of them is going to be our destination OutQ, which the software will know what to do with, and this will trigger smart routing. In this case, it's going to email it out as a PDF. So you'll see the asterisk, you'll see that's the destination OutQ. This is something the software knows what to do. So when this form application is merged, is processing it out, it's going to go out and say, oh, we're going to send this out as a PDF via email. I'm going to trigger smart routing. It's going to look for an email address, and it's going to go off and email this output to that address. The other one that we're going to do is we're going to do a second line, and in this case, since we're going to set up the IPDF monitor to also set up a PDF of the document into a directory, I want this to go out to or the PCL output, I want this to go out to a OutQ that is specifically designated without a writer to hold that PCL, and the IPDF monitor will pick it up from there. Remember, our engines, this is a way of doing the daisy chain part of the engines where we hand off from one part to another. So when this processes through, the IPDF monitor will pick it up as the next step and process it through the actual output. So in this case, I actually have an output called to PDF monitor, which I created earlier. It's an OutQ without a writer. And in this setup, when you look at it, it's going to process one, trigger smart routing to email out, process through. It's actually going to go and process through with sending this out to an OutQ without a writer for the IPDF monitor to pick up. So that's going to be the next step, and you'll see that as well. And finally, one of the things that we want to do with this form application is set up the smart routing email default. So we actually want our customers to get an email that makes sense to them. And if I go in here, actually I'm going to set up our email default value, which is F6. And this is a way to say, I'm actually just going to use the default that we have. In this case, we have a no reply at informdecisions.com. And we're actually going to set up the actual subject line that we want, so we can actually say an invoice that actually says, let's see, I don't know, something like, here is your new invoice. Okay, if I could type, and also a little message that says, hello, customer. Here is your new invoice. Something like that. You get the idea. You can actually type the message that you want, and you can set this up. This is going to be the default message or email body that goes out with the output from our application, which is Web v2. And just hit F10. It updates it. Now our smart routing is completed. So we know that the form application is going to get triggered to do smart routing by doing the asterisk email PDF. We set up the default email that the customer will see, and we've actually said, okay, we're going to obtain the email address to go out from our spoof file on row 7 between columns 9 and 35. So we've set that up fairly quick in the whole scenario. So what's next to do? In this case, since when we process this automatically, the engine's going to be working fairly close with the actual oh, by the way, this is a little scenario on bursting that just shows it that we were talking about, where if it's a 2-page spoof file, it's going to go out as one document with 2 pages. When we do the bursting, it actually splits that up and sends it out one document with 1 page each. It's a little something there. But since we're actually going to work with the form application and triggering this automatically, we want the engine to pick this up. And what's going to do that is the iDocs engine. So we're going to set this up to do the actual processing along the way here for this form application. And just as a recap, what we're going to actually review and actually set up is the iDocs engine first. And this is just a little pictorial on how this process will take place. The spoof file will go into an out queue without a writer, so it doesn't print out. And our iDocs engine is going to actually do a test on the spoof file value. And if it's true, then it's going to initiate the merge process. Now, notice that I have polling and data queue. You can actually set this engine up to be a polling engine or data queue engine, so we can actually have the pipe of data queue tied into the out queue. So when the spoof file does go in there, it says, oh, there's a spoof file there, let me take action. Versus a polling engine, which will frequently monitor that out queue, would check the out queue to see if there's something in there. 2 different purposes, 2 different ways of doing that. If you have more detailed questions on that, just give me a call, since we're going to run out of time, but we do have some options on those. The next part of it is after the, when the merge process happens, is we're going to take the spoof file and process that out with the application. And we're going to send out the output. And we're going to send the output out to different places. We're going to send it out to resulting out queue. That's going to be defined in the engine, or the engine's going to tell it, no, I'm not going to tell you where to go. The form application is going to tell you where to go, in which case that triggers the smart writing process, or we're going to actually send it off to a destination out queue as well. So we have some options there. And after this process is done, the spoof file that initially came into the originating out queue is going to go into an archive out queue. You can actually have that deleted if you want to, or you could have it go into the archive out queue so a different engine can pick it up, or if you want reprints and different options. So you have an option of keeping that or deleting it. And our setup for that on the green screen on the iDocs engine is going to, from the iDocs main menu, is going to be work with engines. And actually, I'm just going to save some time by not typing it up, and I just actually preset that up here. But this is going to be what we did. So we did F6 to create a new engine, gave it a name, gave it a description, and then I actually said at the end of the processes that goes on, I want this to go into an out queue without a writer, and that's going to be stored there. And I just called it archive under my library. And on this setup, I actually have it set up as a data queue, so I just typed in a name for a data queue under my library. If you want this to be a polling agent, then you just leave these 2 fields empty. If you're doing anything custom, you're talking to us, so don't worry about that field. This engine can actually be a serial engine or also an aggregate engine. So we do have a process where we can aggregate different outputs from different merge process into one PDF and send that out as one PDF. So we can aggregate the output together. And this engine does have that capability. In our case, we're just going to do a straight engine in which we're going to monitor an out queue called in under my library. In this case, I'm going to actually look at the user data attribute of the spoof file to do my test. And if I did F, I have all these, or F4, if I have all these options to actually select as an option to select an attribute that I want to be testing on. And the spoof file attribute value here is going to be actually webinar. That's the actual spoof file data on my spoof file. So when the spoof file comes into the in-out queue, it's going to test on this webinar value for my user data. If that's true, then it's going to do the merge process with the form application called WebV3. And in this case, for the resultant out queue, you can actually tell it specifically go to an out queue, or in my case, I'm going to say, nah, star form def is a reserved key that we have that the software knows that the engine's not going to tell it where to go. It's going to look back and say the form application is going to tell you where to go. So when this process actually is over and processing through, if I go back into my application and take a look at it, it's going to go that when it processes through, it's going to go, okay, I'm going to trigger smart writing because I know I'm going to send that out as an email, as a PDF with email. And then on the second pass, it's going to send the output to an AlQ call to PDF monitor. And when the smart writing is triggered along the way, it knows that it's going to actually grab the email address from my to address because it's going to use the reserve field for my to address. And along the way, it's going to go and know that it's going to actually use this email default for my email body. And that's how this all starts coming in together in the process along the way. So that's going to take us from the form application, setting up smart routing, setting up the engine, and when we start this and process this through, this will actually all pick up. Now the last part we're going to talk about today, which will just take us a few minutes, is actually setting up the IPDF monitor, which is another engine. And in this case, the IPDF monitor is a way to take the PCL output that we're setting to the AlQ call to PDF monitor. We're going to monitor that AlQ. We're going to pick up the actual output, convert that into a PCL, and we're going to send it to a directory. And in that case, I'm just going to go here because I actually preset that. Yeah, I guess I didn't. We'll just set that up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to submit a job. We're going to hit F4, and I'm going to actually call the command, our idocs command call IPDF monitor. Select F4, and I'm going to tell it what AlQ I'm going to monitor. In our case here, we're going to monitor the 2PDF mon AlQ under my library. I'm going to tell it what destination AlQ I want this to go to. In this case, I just have one called on the iView called DanTest, and it's going to end up in the directory called DanTest. I'm not going to worry too much about the data queue. I'm just going to use it preset, just what the defaults are on those. So I'm just going to keep those the same. And the next one I'm going to actually do is I'm going to actually tell it, I'm going to on the PDF file name, I actually want a prefix on that. I'm just going to call it invoice. Just, you can call it whatever you want, doesn't matter. And then I have some additional options on this if I wanted to. I can override if there's anything in that destination directory, or I can say no, I just keep accumulating the files in there. I'm going to do F10 for some additional options. And in my case here, I do want this spool file number to show up. So I'm going to do a star yes here as an option. And once I hit end, that's going to be part of my job that I'm going to submit. And in my case, I'm actually going to, so I see this on the engine, I'm actually going to call this IPDF monitor. And for the user profile, I'm just going to use my own. That's just fine. I'm going to submit this to a job queue. In this case, I'm just going to use QS36 evoke. And that's really it. I'm just going to submit the job. It's going to go in there. If I look at work active job, that's now going to be a job that I have running, which is IPDF engine monitoring in there. I'm also going to do, if I start up the engine as well, so you see this here, go idocs. It's going to start up the engine, and we're just good on time, so we're right on time, so this is good. I'm going to go down to our engine. I'm going to start that engine by doing 8 to start that engine. I'm also going to submit that to QS36 evoke. Hit submit. It's submitted. If I look now at my work active jobs, I have both engines running along the way here. And just to show you that this actually is live and it's actually processing through, I'm actually going to go do a work AlQ under my library. Actually, I can just go archive. There it is. And I'm going to go in. This is the spool file that we're working with. It's a 2-page spool file. And I'm actually going to send that to the in AlQ, which our idocs engine is monitoring. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is release it because the spool file is on hold. And since this is the data queue, we want to actually have this release when it shows up in there. So I'm going to first release it. Then I'm just going to move it over there. I'm just going to say out queue onto my library, go to the in out queue, and that's going to go away. And when I hit refresh, it goes away. If I go to a work active job and I hit F5, I should see those engines running. Right now you see the iDocs engine running. It's processing through. And then our IPDF engine should pick that up as well. And now you see that the IPDF monitor engines pick that up as well. And if I open up a directory where I have that, I actually have a directory linked on my IBM I to my PC, and you see that that's already popping up in there. The first one's popped in. The next one's in there as well, and that's populating right now. You see the 0 bytes on it, and that's just populating. Both have populated successfully. So because we did the bursting, we actually have separate invoices that have popped up. Come on. Where's my... There we go. I thought it was my other one. So this is one of them. And then the other one is in it. But you notice they're 1 pages. They're not 2 pages. If I didn't do the bursting, I would just get 1 PDF with actually 2 pages. And then if I look at my emails, which I'll bring up here in a second, you'll notice that there they are. So this is the first one that came in, single page. It has my, your new hops invoices attached. It has a little tagline in there. It has my signature line as well, because it's a feature that we've added to iMail that we can actually add signature lines. And it has one for each. So we've actually separated out. And that's the actual process of how that's going to work. So you actually saw today adding the actual smart writing options to the form application, setting up the bursting, setting up the actual address to get at the email address, setting up the actual form application to go to 2 different places. We saw how to set up the IPDF monitor and actually take the output from the engine in the merge process and convert that to a PDF and have it go directly to a spot where you can pick it up on a PC or for a different process. So you do have tons of options there. So that was part 3. We're just right at the end. We're at about 28 minutes for our webinar today. If you have any questions specifically towards this or anything else across the board, please, again, feel free to give me a call, send me an email. My information is being displayed right now. And I'm more than happy to answer and just go over everything again if you need it, or any specific questions that you have, since 30 minutes is not a long time. And for next week, it's going to be part 4. Next week, we're actually going to set up the iMail server application, because if there's a problem along the way with our setup that we did today, we want to see what that is. And we actually have a way to set up the iMail application and server to monitor to see if there's a problem and notify the administrator that, oh, hey, something didn't work out. And then you can go as an administrator to go and fix that problem. And then we'll put it all together as well next week. And that will take us, and we'll do a recap as well of the whole project, but that will take us all the way from starting the project in the very beginning all the way to the very end. Again, thank you very much for attending. Please fill out surveys if you haven't. Next Friday will be the same time, Friday the 23rd on 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Again, my name is Orlando Ferreira with Informed Decisions, and thank you.